This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions, Jack.
Hey, we're the Sus Boys, and people say we suss around. Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 296. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, it's been a little while, but we're finally grabbing our popcorn and our milk duds. And
I hate those.
I know, they suck.
Yeah,
I'm a Red Vines
I like
so.
Whoppers, okay.
Whoppers, wow. I don't even think I've ever had Whoppers.
You've never had one of those, like malted milk balls? I think they're the original malted milk ball, in fact.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, judging by our snacks, you may have deduced, dear listener, and by that intro, that we are wandering back into the subliminal cinema today for some movie analysis and reviews, right?
Yeah.
And
analysis, I think. I don't think people. Well, I'm sure we'll review them as well.
Yes. If people want us to interminably summarize the plots of these movies, we will do a little bit of that. But I think we're also going to look at a deeper analysis.
I was thinking in the sense of like saying whether something is good or bad, which like is
right.
may come out, but it's not necessarily the main point that we're going for.
No, we're going to be looking at a deeper level today. I guess I was thinking, what can we call our framework for looking at movies? We already do kind of have a semi-formal alliterative title with subliminal cinema, but I thought there may be some better ones that we could come up with. I think I had cinema psyche. That's okay. Like our cinema psyche, flick philosophy. Anybody? It's a little clunky, but I think maybe the best one is video Weltanschauung.
That's my favorite for sure. Yeah, I think that's good.
This is our video Weltanschauung. It's time to get into the video Weltanschauung.
That really makes us. It's really kind of like a Monkees type of takeoff with the video Weltanschauung. Very, But, I was never aware of that thing that I played at the very beginning, which is a 1997 ABC TV special called "Hey Hey We're the Monkees," starring the now then aged Monkees themselves, probably in like their late 50s or early 60s. I don't know, maybe probably their late 50s. And I think astute listeners to SJ would have noticed the little cameo that was made at the very beginning of that. There was a certain literary agent, a man of the third culture, a man on the bleeding edge of philosophy and science and the internet. That's right. That was Mr. John Brockman making a cameo, the dear friend and scientific academic connector of a certain Jeffrey Epstein. Popping up for a little goofy little cameo. But, one of the things we are going to have to unpack today in one of our films is the sort of nebulous role that John Brockman played in the Monkees' career and their 1968 cinematic debut, Head. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. That, by the way, speaking of whether these movies are good or bad, I thought that movie was awful. That was awful. Like,
it's
I almost
so bad.
Got angry thinking about someone who would like that movie, honestly. Like, I don't want to
literally I had the thought like afterwards, like I need to like in talking about this movie, I need to be careful like not to offend anyone who enjoyed it, because like I just thought this was execrable. Like this is like worthless. I hated it. Like it was almost like a parody of like that type. I mean, in some ways, I guess it was kind of a parody of like Hard Day's Night and stuff like that. But like, like even it was like a level beyond that. It was like a parody of that like idea of kind of a takeoff of that movie. Like it was just worthless.
It has a very interesting like rub it in our faces, folks, but not even in the sense of like, oh, there's like a cult imagery, but like rubbing your face and just like the shittiness of it and like the low effort, the
everything
deliberate.
About it was so obvious and like
simultaneously incoherent, right? Like, which is by
suppose,
design, so we can't hate it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You're not allowed to hate it because they they knew they were sucking
no plot.
on purpose.
It's like a series of like vignettes. The vignettes, like within themselves, like make a kind of sense. Like I wouldn't say that they're like, I guess they have like a psychedelic logic, maybe you could say, like each individual thing, but it's kind of like episodic. It doesn't really like connect per se. There's a little bit of like at the end, it kind of like all the different sort of like subworlds kind of converge in a way, but I like
but I think we kind of thought that I think we had wanted to, especially after the latest Epstein stuff came out, and I think we sort of dove back into the well of just how sus John Brockman is, and I think the impetus for this episode was a longtime listener, It's Drew Time, shout out, reminded us, or I'd kind of forgotten about this, that don't you remember John Brockman was involved in like a weird kind of pop art McLuhanesque like guerrilla ad campaign for Head in 1968. And I was like, oh yeah. And we were reading the sort of books about Stuart Brand and talking about his coming into contact with John Brockman in like the mid to late 1960s, when John Brockman was, like Stuart Brand, a at least part-time army officer that was also like spending the weekends in Greenwich Village and just like hanging out with wild artists. And there was a collective called USCO, USCO, right? And John Brockman, he didn't start it. This is like Gerd Stern was one of the main founders of it, and then I'm forgetting the name of like the married couple that were also big people, the people that had the church outside of New York.
I don't recall.
Their names will come up at this point. But at some point, John Brockman floats into their orbit, and they kind of start collabing with him. And they always had like a sus line about like we call it USCO because like all of us are equal except for Brockman because he's like better than us. I don't know. It's just like everything about, we talked about the Net documentary about the Unabomber, where John Brockman, in like really the peak of his like Epstein edge salad days in 2002, is giving his little goofy little story about how he ended up totally intersecting with like all of these influential art people just by like playing like, I don't know, like was he playing like a fiddle in the fucking park? And then he ran across a filmmaker that was like, do you want to program my film festival? And then he just like does. And then like suddenly he's hanging out with Marshall McLuhan and like bringing in all these ideas about the medium as a message and hanging out with the Warhol kind of crowd and all this stuff. And then kind of parlays that into being like an unorthodox ad man and like PR man. And then I think, I forget if he was also in like business school at Columbia at this time and whether or not he like dropped out or whatever. But, this is like the origin days of John Brockman and how he became like an impresario.
Yeah.
And
it was the Durkees, I think. It was Steve and Barbara Durkee. Is that who you're thinking of?
I think so. I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then he somehow gets linked up. He probably knows people like in common, not with the Monkees directly at first, but with the producers of the Monkees film, and indeed the people who basically made the Monkees as a media creation. The Hollywood producers Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson. Who are, I've known about these guys for a long time, and, every now and then I get kind of like my memory jarred, or I think reading through things like Dave McGowan, you start to see them like pop up again. But remember that book, Easy Riders and Raging Bulls?
Yes.
Probably from the late 2000s. It was really a book about, it was like the definitive book about New Hollywood. And it's a pretty good, though I'd say, like, you know, there's deeper veins. Like, if you read between the lines and some stuff, like, it's not like the final source if you want to judge, say, the susness of like 60s and 70s Hollywood and the counterculture or whatever. But like it, you know, it has a lot of interviews with people that were like involved and it has a lot of lore in it. And these guys, you know, they made this movie Head, but then the next movie they made after that, I think it was BBS, I think was their production company. The next movie they made after this was Easy Rider, which is, you know, it's in the title of that book, Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, a kind of classic of countercultural cinema that heralded a new era for Hollywood, a new radical era led by the boomers, you know, where things were going to get crazy. And indeed, in the 1970s, you know, I think it's kind of a consensus now that, like, American movies were pretty good in the 70s, right? Like, I mean, you know, even if all susness aside, like, the American movie industry really, like, did this worked out well for them in a way, you know, after the sort of there were some financial crises, like with the studios in the 60s, the Hays Code, which is very important, you know, which was instituted, maybe, I forget if it was like the late 1930s, 1940s, when it was instituted.
It was the 30s. Yeah, I think we talked about 1934 that the Hays Code was instituted. Let me make sure
which is why there's all these like gangster movies and more like edgy early talkies, like between like 1930 and 34, and then things kind of like get a little more milquetoast after that for several decades.
Yeah.
And,
although people were still shocked by, like, a lot of the movies by AIP that we'll talk about, like, people were shocked by, you know, when they came out. Like, they definitely pushed the envelope.
Right.
You know,
that's American International Pictures, and not the same thing
this
as
is not Head.
Schneider and Rafelson.
Head was different, like a different production company. That's somehow, like, this episode like went through some different stages of conceptual evolution. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Head, like, was preserved as a film that, you know, I was actually curious about this movie from like John Brockman's involvement, but now I almost feel like, God, why did I have to watch this? But
the longest 80 minutes you'll ever spend watching a movie, pretty much. But it
felt so long. Like I remember pausing at one point and being like, this is you know, I'm only like a half hour into this movie. Anyway.
I feel like if you look away, you get distracted or look away from it for 1 second, you look back and you're completely lost. Like, which I guess is by design because the movie doesn't have much of a plot, but like you're just like, oh, a completely new set. They're in like the Wild West now. They're in like the deserts of Arabia. They're fighting in like World War II.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways,
I don't know if that was Arabia because eventually an Italian tank shows up too. There did
Africa.
Have like kind of an Arab horseman, but yeah, I guess it could have been North Africa. Yeah.
Right. But that company you mentioned, AIP, American International Pictures, that's a very, very important and influential film studio, and it's kind of unlikely that it would be because it mostly put out B movies, right? And the main figure that was like kind of the driving force, the biggest sort of single auteur, producer / director at AIP throughout this era was Roger Corman. And, you know, he gets a lot of attention in Easy Riders and Raising Bulls. And if you look at like interviews or biographies of any of the big like boomer Hollywood directors, many of them, not all, but like a lot, like a shockingly high number of them, got their first jobs and kind of developed a lot of their skill sets working on AIP B movies, you know, oftentimes as like assistant directors or editors or writers or something like that. And eventually, like, because they were like scrupulously low budget always. That was like a code that he lived by, was like he only is making shit that like can be done within a certain scope. And if like some of it looks a little bit, there was a lot of like cost saving little camera tricks and things like that. I remember Martin Scorsese, who worked on some Roger Corman movies early on when he first moved to LA, saying that in like the commentary for Last Temptation of Christ, in the scene in the temple where Jesus, you know, Willem Dafoe throws all the money changers out, and then all these Roman guards show up, and there's like a whip a whip pan of the camera to like one stairway, and there's like 5 Romans, and then it whips to another one, and then there's like another like 5 Roman soldiers. He's like, oh yeah, that's like an old Roger Corman trick. I only had 5 extras. We need to like save money, so I just like reused the same 5 guys in like a bunch of like whipping shots to make it look like there was like a huge crowd. And it's like that type of thing.
Yes,
learning,
that's
like,
a common feature of those early like AIPB movies for sure. It's like there's only like 3 people in it, and they make it seem like it's a large group.
Right.
Actually,
Which you could see the benefits of that. Yeah,
I was reading not too long ago that like Martin Scorsese was asked to like recommend some films for like preservation, like in the MoMA or something, or in some like film archive, some kind of museum. And one of the movies he recommended, we didn't watch it for this episode, but it was Horror of the Black Museum, right? Which was one of these like early like AIP like horror B movies, like kind of like actually like a weaker one. Although it did have like an interesting gimmick, which was it was fed in Hypnovista, which basically like there's a 13-minute like hypnotic prologue presented by like some hypnotist where he would like hypnotize the audience so that they would be like more immersed in the film.
Oh my god.
According to like Herman Cohen, who was like a screenwriter on some of these movies, like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and producer, he like said that like they had to remove that prologue from the film in some countries because people actually would become hypnotized by it. But people didn't think too highly of it at the time. They saw it as like kind of this gimmick that like was sort of popular during that period. But but I guess Scorsese like really loved that movie. There's a part where like someone like puts up binoculars like to look across a distance, and then like some like spikes come out of the binoculars and like stab her through the eyes and kill her.
Oh my god.
And like I guess a lot of these new Hollywood directors like really love that moment, and it really stuck with them.
Yeah, you can see like Wes Craven, like the later horror directors, Tobe Hooper, who actually we almost included because his debut film Eggshells is sort of adjacent to like acid cinema or like hippie exploitation a little bit. But I think we decided, because there actually are like a number of B movies that sort of flourished from like 1966 to like 68, like when the first like Summer of Love was kind of hitting, that maybe today we would like limit ourselves to kind of the first wave of like hippie exploitation acid cinema. And then there's kind of the post Manson early 1970s ones. And it's interesting that you see, maybe not so shocking, that there is a shift towards a little more of a hard genre, either a kind of psychological thriller or horror kind of frame for doing a kind of hippie exploitation movie, and usually involves kind of like a sinister commune, a sinister cult leader who's like a Satanist and like blah, blah, blah. Whereas the earlier ones, I mean, there's a mixture of like positive representation and kind of finger wagging, like this is dangerous kind of shit. But I'd say on the whole, it's a little more sunny and like, what's really the harm? Like, just don't get a bad trip, man. Like, you know, but they're a little more optimistic, and like the ones that Jack Nicholson participated in, which is several. Like he was the screenwriter of 2 of these early acid movies. Readers of Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon will remember this, but he was, I think it was 1967's The Trip, starring Peter Fonda, which was, I think a lot of the interiors for that were shot in musician Arthur Lee's house in Laurel Canyon, which is already apparently so psychedeliced out they barely had to do any set design, which is about like a sort of normie like TV executive whose wife, he finds out his like wife is cheating on him, and he's like sad, so he arranges to do like an LSD trip up in like a house in Laurel Canyon, and then has like a wacky day. I don't, did you watch that one?
No, I didn't. I didn't watch it.
I watched it a few. I actually saw it at one of the old Revival theaters here in LA.
Nice.
They were showing it, and it's all, a lot of these they do not, I would say, have like the strongest plots, but they're definitely trying to convey the vibe and like subjective experience of being on LSD and the new culture, like the hippie culture. And then the going forth for that with Jack Nicholson, then he is the co-writer of Head, the Monkees film in 1968, and then he also stars in, but I don't think writes, the other 1968 movie Psych-Out, which I think Psych-Out was an AIP film. I have to double check.
Yes, it was.
Okay, yeah. Psych-Out was an AIP film, and that's actually set and shot in San Francisco, unlike a lot of these other ones, which are mostly shot in
fact,
LA.
I made the mistake of watching the director's cut of Psych-Out, which was
I
like
did too.
100. Yeah, okay, all right. So this is much longer than like the actual theatrical cut would have been. The theatrical cut is like under an hour and a half, whereas this was like an hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah, hour 45. I wasn't sure. Yeah. Were you aware of like what they added versus not?
I assumed that it was like a bunch. No, I was not aware. I assumed that it was like a lot of the musical stuff, like I imagine, or like just kind of the scenes of them just like sitting around, like while music like kind of vaguely plays in the background, because there was a lot
that rolling around, being on acid. Yeah,
exactly.
Just like the strawberry alarm clock I think appears in Psych-Out, and then you also have a movie that you watched but I didn't get to, called The Love-Ins from 1967, which is sort of a riff right on like it's about a kind of Timothy Leary like character that is like
kind of like a Weed Atman type as well, but like Timothy Leary meets Weed Atman sort of, but it like I thought that movie was definitely worse than Psych-Out. That reminded me a little bit actually of the earlier movie, which was not an AIP movie. It's black and white film, The Love Cult, which I think was 1966. I guess there were a couple of movies on this theme, which is like kind of interesting because it seems like people kind of saw the writing on the wall of Manson like in a big way. Like, I mean, I honestly think that like even going back to like one of the most like interesting things to me, like in terms of like the hook for AIP, like is like even going back to like I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Long before, this is a movie in 1957, right? Which also I think like one shot at a lot of, it's very interesting because it sits on the edge of, I'll get back to the Love-Ins in a bit, perhaps, but like it sits on the edge of like, because the titular werewolf of I Was a Teenage Werewolf in this 1957 movie, probably not like strictly a baby boomer, right? Like technically probably like in the silent generation. Yeah. But like that was also like kind of the beat generation, and like there's some great lines in that movie. Like early on he says like, people bug me or something. And, he gets into a fight with a classmate and the police have to come up and he's like, I don't know what to say. Like people bug me. And the police officer who's there is like, go ahead and hide behind your jive talk. And it's like these things that have become like universal, like idioms in regular speech. Like at the time it's like, whoa, this kid's talking this crazy jive. But it's kind of, I mean, you can kind of see the influence of Rebel Without a Cause, like in some ways. These movies like had a really fast turnover time. So like
The Wild One, or is it The Wild Ones? Another motorcycle biker movie.
Yeah. I mean, there's no motorcycles in I Was a Teenage Werewolf, so that element doesn't like come into play, but definitely like the kind of concern and the anxiety over like the threat of like the teenage delinquent, or like the violent teenager. And like I think like at the time, like even though obviously there had been like no shortage of werewolf movies, the idea of like a teenager turning into a werewolf was like somewhat like shocking. It was like somewhat of like a kind of pushing the envelope a little bit to have this thing. And of course, the title like really just captured people's imaginations as we were talking about over text.
It's a funny like illusion or callback to. I think there's a couple movies that have that like naming convention, but one was I Was a Communist for the FBI, which is like early 50s film at the height of like the Red Scare and kind of McCarthyism. It's a true story about I think like a Croatian American guy in Pittsburgh that went undercover. He was like a steel worker who went undercover in the Communist Party for like 7 years on behalf of the FBI. And then they made this kind of like cool movie. I saw that it was nominated for Best Documentary at the Oscars in like 1951 or 2. And I'm like, it's not a document. It's like based on a true story, but it's like, as far as I didn't see it, but I'm like pretty sure it's like a dramatized movie version. But I guess that maybe I wonder if they like switched at a certain point to being like, oh, documentaries are like when you just like interview real people, not like something that's based on a true story. Maybe they introduced the adapted screenplay category for that purpose. I don't know. But that was weird.
Yeah, like I think adapted screenplay is just like if it has any source material. I think like I think maybe the sort of the definition of documentary might have been a little bit looser, or kind of like the bar for what a documentary is. I mean, honestly, like probably there are like modern documentaries that have recreations like in a subtle way that like still, people don't like really think about it. The fact this is like obviously like there's recreations involved here. Like
I like they hired actors to play the real life people and like recreate, like do drama basically instead of like, so yeah, it feels categorically not, but maybe who knows? Maybe they're just tripping over each other to give that movie an Academy Award so they wouldn't get McCarthy or something.
I mean, who knows like what the like competition was? I'd be interested to see what the other entrants in that category were. But yeah, so it is kind of take up to that, and like that is like not like totally irrelevant to like the like content of the film, because like when I think in a way like the movie Teen Wolf, like the much later movie, doesn't have anything to do with any of the films we're talking about, but like I feel like it was almost like a shit coat if I was a teenage werewolf, because like maybe like the concept itself had become like funny or like funnier by that time, but like
that's a good point.
The aesthetics of Teen Wolf, like the werewolf like in a Letterman jacket, but like in that movie it's just like really good timing.
He
and,
rocks
like,
at basketball.
Like, exactly, and it's just awesome. Whereas like this
is pretty horrifying. I watched it just on your recommendation because it is an early AIP movie. It's pre-60s, and I thought, and you said there's something kind of like sus about it, and like right in the beginning, I realized like, oh, this is about like. This is sort of low-key about like an evil MK Ultra psychiatrist like finding a troubled but like gifted child and being like, he's the perfect specimen for my werewolf experiment, for my lycanthropy experiments.
I mean, it's very interesting. Like it really is like
PTK vibes.
It was quite clear that like this has to do like a little bit with kind of like the trauma of like the war babies on some level. Like it is. I mean, again, this is possibly like a kind of exigency of like budget, but like he has like no mother, and like the absence of the mother is never addressed. And there are these weird lines, like the psychiatrist, Dr. Brandon, who is like played by Whit Bissell, who's like this pretty like he was in a couple of these other movies too. And
wait, Bissell, like Bissell?
No relation. I looked it up. They're not related.
Okay.
Yeah,
good. I'm glad you looked it up.
Yeah. I was like, but
folks, I don't know.
Yeah.
But he works at the local aircraft company, I think, and he's on loan like to the local police department to help troubled youths. And it's like, all right, what the fuck? Like this is something weird.
He like it's. Yeah, and one of the sort of pitches for him is like that he's modern and he uses hypnosis, right, to help kids. Like there's a great the dialogue in this movie isn't so bad either. I think it was massaged a little bit by Foley, the director, and the policeman sort of is the first one to sort of recommend him to the main character, Tony, who's played by Michael Landon, who like later was on Little House on the Prairie and all this stuff, and who like does a good job in this movie, and he like was the werewolf and everything, like he put that werewolf makeup on, but yeah, and he's like, he's modern, uses him, and at first like this kid is like, no, I'm not gonna do it, but he goes to like this Halloween party. And at the Halloween party, it's pretty funny. Like there's this one character who like plays the bongo drums. You remember this?
Oh yeah,
and,
the bongo guy.
Thing.
Can I play the bongos? I can play them better than a regular drum. Like they're so 50s.
Yeah. It's and he sings this like ridiculous song. It's like eeny meeny miny mo, or like something like that. Like it's like very like kind of like swinging. But like at the time, like probably like bongo drums were like kind of I think bongo drums were like banned in Cuba like in the 20s, like because they were sort of like seen
African?
as like this like Afro-Latinidad like kind of symbol, so like, you can imagine like in this like sleepy 50s suburban town like what the bongo drums like might have symbolized, you do kind of have like, and they go and they party in this abandoned house. There is kind of this like sort of thing of like, these like are swinging teens who aren't gonna get with the program, but he has like, the main character struggles with bouts of rage, and at one point that same guy who plays the bongos like comes up and like blows a horn in his like ear, from behind, which I guess like is a prank in this world. And so he like turns around and just like starts like beating the shit out of him, and like his girlfriend tries to stop him and he like smacks her to the floor. And like in a pretty like economical, like pretty well done writing, like you don't see like a whole thing where he's like, all right, I'll do it, like I'll go, like you just cut to the next scene, he's like in the psychiatrist's office with this guy who's like I'm gonna help blah blah. And he goes to the back and he has kind of this like assistant who's like kind of like an Igor type, but like he's not like really like a sort of hunchback, like kind of
yeah.
So he's actually got he's the only one with a conscience, he's and he actually the Dr. Brendan has to threaten him to like get him to go along with the scheme, because immediately he just like fetch the scopolamine, and like we're gonna mix it with this like concoction.
Wait, forget. Does he literally say scopolamine?
Yes, he does.
Oh
he
my
says,
god! Oh my god!
He gets out of like a fridge and he starts mixing it with some other drug. He gives him like a sedative first, and then he's like, "I'm gonna get the scopolamine, like mix it with my like I don't know proprietary drug or something," and he like unfolds his scheme, which is, his sort of motivation for it, and he feels that humanity is like headed for disaster. And the only way that we can like possibly save ourselves is to go back to the beginning, to go back to like our primal wildness, which then we can just start over from scratch. But anyway, so he basically does like a hypnotic regression, and it's like kind of like I was curious about like whether it was like I think it was Aben Kander who wrote the screenplay with again Herman Cohen, but I think that they're like credited differently in the movie. But like I'm curious, like because it does like actually show like a little bit of like knowledge of like the sort of like psychiatric theories at the time, like the like I mentioned Rebel Without a Cause, like the book on which Rebel Without a Cause was like Without a Cause. Like it was based on a book that was like about like this like murderer or like this like sort of maladjusted like killer, right? Like Rebel Without a Cause. What was his real name? The guy was it Herman Danville? It was like a much earlier book, and it was like a hypnoanalysis of a criminal psychopath by Robert M. Linder. I think that I think Herman Danville might have been the name of the
subject,
the criminal psychopath. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, okay. I'm just thinking of it from memory. But yeah, like so it is interesting that like in this sort of like genre version of that Rebel Without a Cause story, you kind of see this sort of a theme of hypnosis come back, because he and this idea of like the primal scene, the sort of primal scene of identity or of trauma that like kind of imprints upon you. Like so he like basically regresses him not only to childhood but like back to werewolfery. Doesn't like the science of it doesn't really make any sense, but anyway, so from there he just starts like killing everybody around him. Like although while he's in his human state it causes him torture. But it is like an interesting, like there's even a part where like when Dr. Brendan sits down with the werewolf, or this to-be werewolf, the werewolf to be, he says like, think of this like as a trip, but we're not going like, think of this as a trip, like, but we're not going out into space. We're going, back in time. And it's like the language, like the fact that he like says like a trip, like specifically, I mean, like before like all of this, I mean, not like totally obviously like some of this like parlance, but like that obviously it's so emphasized, and it's so like it is interesting. This is like kind of a drug induced like hypnotic kind of killing spree, where the kind of this like repressed teenager becomes like really hairy. I almost felt like in Psych-Out, like the there's this sort of a hippie mystic character who's called the Seeker.
Dean Stockwell, a young Dean Stockwell plays him. Yeah,
right. And this one kind of a climactic scene, he's basically like standing in a burning house, like oblivious to everything around him. Oh, you mean that guy?
Oh, the brother character. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And like I almost felt like he kind of looks like the teenage werewolf in a way, cause like the way that his hair like is kind of like in this weird sort of like drape all like around his face, and like he has this big beard,
his obvious wig.
Like, exactly.
There's a lot of wigs.
You can totally like see it's interesting how like this like idea of, I mean, like if you read between the lines, you kind of can see this like PTK angle to the whole thing almost, because like of course in that movie it is like this sort of rogue like military psychologist, like he's like connected to the military as they acknowledge, but like it's never like is this project like approved by the military. He certainly imagines that it will be. He certainly thinks that like if he can, like at the end, he's trying to film this transformation so he can prove like this great achievement that he's made in turning a teenager into a werewolf. You know,
I mean, he's just about draft age, isn't he? Right?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, I mean, this is it doesn't. I don't think the movie implies. I don't recall there ever being a kind of like, if the army finds out about, if the Air Force finds out about this, they'll be so mad. It's more like, like.
In fact, it's the opposite. It's like if they find out about this, they're going to be so pleased. Like if I can show this, you know, werewolf transformation.
Yeah, and you know, the final thing is not like, wow, like, you know, there's a kind of classic like 50s, like the two kind of surviving guys at the end come upon, I believe, like the werewolf kills the doctor and then like they shoot him, I think.
Yeah, the cops come in and just blast the werewolf into
they blast him, and then he turns back into a boy, and they're like, well, at least like they'll remember him this way. And I think they give a classic line where like they have the very Hays Code era, you have to slide in like a moral at like the very end, and it's like just another piece of evidence that man's not meant to play God.
Yeah,
you know, and
like
so
that.
the message is about human scientific manipulation and playing God with people, not necessarily that, wow, I didn't know that like lycanthropy is real or something like that. Like the whole movie is kind of couched in sinister psychological experiments that can turn somebody into a werewolf killing machine with like amnesiac properties where they don't really remember like what they do in their blind rage. That's very PTK, you know, like they are programming him to kill. And this came out in 57. So MK Ultra was already operative for like 5 years. They were giving people LSD in certain contexts back at this point, but it was very not well known. However, it was known in Hollywood where they made this movie. So, like, because remember, Allen Ginsberg's cousin, the therapist, Oscar Janiger, who was based in Beverly Hills for many years, like, he was a focal point for having a lot of clients that were like Hollywood stars and giving them LSD and doing like LSD therapy sessions with them. That's how a lot of the older Hollywood people, I forget the exact like name, it was like Gene Autry or like people like that, or maybe even Jimmy Stewart, I don't know, got turned on before there was a psychedelic counterculture to like lead them into. They were giving them LSD in like very private sessions. And I think, and there was an effort to go around. I think this is also when Al Hubbard was like bopping around distributing like Sandow's government lab LSD like in different places around the country. You know, they were in a way targeting artists and creatives in Hollywood as a kind of like ideal test subject of the and also I think they kind of put out like kind of like they did the Veterans Hospital in Palo Alto a little later, like they'd kind of put out the flyer or like the word of like who wants to try this, and naturally a lot of like artist type people were like probably more more willing than the average person to be like, oh, that sounds interesting, and give it a shot. So I think by 1957 you could say that like Roger Corman, AIP, the group around, like in general, there were people around town, and it wasn't that big, in the business. They probably had heard a thing or two about this shit. Now, maybe they didn't know it was like part of a vast, like, government mind control project. Maybe not.
Well,
but
honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, they, like, rather than encountering it, like, I think that almost in a way, like, if you watch these movies, like, with, like, kind of, like, a critical eye, like, you can actually like see like a kind of trajectory that like that tells a kind of the true story like of the 60s in a way, because there were all these films like I Was a Teenage Werewolf where basically you have this sort of manipulative like false mentor figure. Like basically they use this plot a couple of times, including in How to Make a Monster, where it was literally like actors who put on like special effects makeup that like dulled their minds and made them like kill for this like vengeful effects artist who was like out to actually
that's like good. That's good.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.